Good afternoon. For those who watch us online, we are at the investor section, new opportunities for investment. It's not traditional for positive hack days. It's an event about cybersecurity and everything around it, but this time on these positive hack days, we wanted to add the section about investment, stock market, and the reason is quite clear. Last time, Positive wasn't a public company, but in December last year, we had an IPO in the Moscow Stock Exchange. It's now a continuous topic for us, investments, stock market. Today, we have several people, invited speakers. Let's start with Evgeny Kogan, who is a well-known person, then Vladimir Sakovich, Skolkovo Ventures, Alina Sychova,
Dmitry
Dmitry Novichkov, Invest Heroes, and Anton Malkov. All of them are respected people, veterans of the stock market, analysts. So we have a good panel today. Let me begin with the first subject, which is a little confrontational. IPO. It so happened that Positive Technologies was the last Russian companies to do the IPO, to become a public company. It happened in December 2021. Since then, for almost 6 months, we didn't have any more IPOs. The question to the panel is, what is happening? Does it mean that IPOs have entered in Russia, or are there some other factors which delay IPOs now? The question is to Anton. What do you think? Thank you, Maxim. Well, honestly, the world is divided into two periods, before February 24 and after February 24. The greater part of the Russian free float is in the hands of the foreign investors. The share of retail investors is growing. We had a lot of foreigners and still have them. So the market was driven by foreign investors. This factor, because of the events that you know, has come to an end. But on the other hand, the Russian market doesn't stand still. It has been coming for a long time, a little before your event. The St. Petersburg Stock Exchange became public. We couldn't imagine it 3 years ago or 10 years ago. We didn't imagine that we can have a deal for $175 million through retail. It was difficult to imagine, but now Russian market is retail-driven. The trade in the Moscow Stock Exchange are provided by retail investors. And obviously, this is a good foundation basis for the deals like SPB Stock Exchange. It's difficult to imagine when it can happen, but it will happen one day. I am absolutely sure. It's a matter of time. Now, Vladimir, the question is to you. You are more related to institutional investors and funds. What do you think is the lack of institutional investors the main factor? Is the retail king now? I believe we don't have IPOs not because of the lack of institutional investors. So we all try to find where the balance is, not only in Russia but worldwide. We believe in the second or third quarter it will be clear where the balance is, which companies are better, which are worse. We didn't have a lot of institutional investors locally. We had Western funds mainly, but those Western funds were filled by Russian capitals, which returned to Russia through the Western funds. Now, this flow is much limited. We need a few quarters for the Russian capital to flow into the local institutional investors and come back to the stock market. Will it happen? Will it be more than before or less than before? It's too early to say. We can expect that we shall have even more capital than before, because the capital that fled from Russia didn't only come back to Russia, it also spread across the international stock markets. And now that the Russian money doesn't go away, we may expect bigger volumes than before. But now the landscape is unclear. Any evaluation of the company is an evaluation of the future. Now it's very difficult to evaluate the future because the situation changes every day and every hour, and people are cautious now. Evgeny? The only thing to add is that much depends on the paradigm of our general development of the country and economy, and where to take resources for development. I think common sense will prevail, and we shall understand that without market economy we cannot do. And stock market is the only tool to attract finances for development of economy, of business, and so on. Also, I'm looking at alternatives. We have a lot of people with the money, with a lot of money. They are concentrated at 1 or 2% of population, but it's a different thing. Nevertheless, we have a lot of money in the country, a lot of corporations. We have a lot of liquidity, and they have to sell dollars and euro, get rubles, and where to send the rubles. The company do M&A. We see that they buy and buy. Vanya Tereshkin bought Home Credit Bank, and we are at the beginning of the process. What is next? Those corporations will go to the market, and people from those companies come to me and say, this is the market, what to buy? A lot of questions. And one more important point. The financial market is all about transparency, about reporting, about understanding of the company and its future. If you analyze, you have to analyze and not just guess. If some companies remain in non-transparent, the investor will look at transparent companies only. And if people are clever and say that we are transparent, everything is clear, we have a lot of money, that company is doomed to success. As for our local closed sandbox, Russian stock market, it's a local small sandbox. I don't know who is going to sell. Who will go from their GDRs? What is next? Where to spend the money? And they are looking for interesting stories every day. despite international collisions, and the world will be very hot in the near future, our market can demonstrate phenomenal growth because there is no alternative. It's an interesting subject, but if we look at a different area, investors, funds, what about companies that would like to go to the stock market? Are there such companies? Alina, did you talk to such companies? The companies who would like to do the IPO, do such companies come to you saying we want to be public? Right now, honestly, everyone put those strategies on hold. Yes, the sandbox is small, but we look at the global situation as well. The global IPO market in Q1 is minus 72%. It's not about Russia, it's about US. A lot of companies delay their IPOs because of the pandemics, because of the inflation, because of the helicopter money which were invested in retail. Then February 24 as well. So it's too early to discuss now who is ready, who is not, who is ready for the IPO. The process of IPO preparation doesn't take a month or two. It takes much longer. It requires the change of the company DNA. One thing is when you are private, the other thing when you are public. And the process of DNA change takes a lot of time. A lot of processes, a lot of structural changes, a lot of changes in corporate management, transparency, which Evgeny mentioned, and the question of market is secondary now. As soon as the windows of opportunity will be open, when we realize where we're all moving, we are moving and the market is moving. The latest statistics says that everyone went to cash and everyone sits with cash and wait to see what is going to happen and where to deploy such cash. So before we realize that, it's difficult to say. On the one hand, we have a lot of money, the money which is looking for investments. They are in the cash format. On the other hand, the companies cannot do the IPO because they don't have reliability, transparency, and stability to invest. So this is a disbalance. A lot of money, but no one is going to invest. Is that right? I would put it this way exactly, because now, really, taking into account the instability and, well, you can see what happens with US stock markets, tech stocks. So the expectation of community is not to grow, but to save. Power industry, banking is something that the investors could invest. But all trends are temporary. Whenever something is going to change, we can see a lot of transformation. Look how fast we overcame the pandemic. Within a year or two, the companies that were ready and used the opportunity, the windows of opportunity, they can be applauded.
Окей, спасибо. Я в последнее время много
I heard a lot of things recently about how to evaluate the company, the approaches and methodologies through multipliers, through DCFs and other interesting terms no longer work. The question is to Dmitry, who is a professional analyst. Is that right? Are we now in the area of uncertainty, how to evaluate the company, how to invest or not to invest? I think that standard methodologies didn't go. There are different modes of operation in the market. People look only at local conditions like the Russian market. They look at the global situation internationally. Worldwide, we see much fewer IPOs than before. And liquidity goes out of the market. Why? Why IPOs grew? Because money was printed. We had too much money, and it was very good to do IPO because the money was there, and the company collected that money, and companies were ready to pay to get a lot of money. So this bubble no longer exists. But what about Russia? Of course, one of the methods is broken, the dividend method. Most of the companies refuse to pay the dividends because of the uncertainty. They are not sure what is going to happen in future, although they don't know where to spend the money. Import has shrunk. At the growth mode, we cannot say that in a month's time the company will cost that much. So 2 to 3 years, what we need for fundamental, non-technical investment to realize what is the addressable market, what the company can do, who are the competitors, how they correlate in terms of products, and on that basis we can evaluate what kind of money, capital flow it may have. Can it earn the money, or will it work at a loss? It's a long-term story. You can never expect fast results from the market. So the only method which is broken is a method of evaluation by dividends. So many of us are long-term investments for many Russian, to say nothing of foreign companies. But that is off topic. You wanted to comment? Yes. The situation is difficult, complex. A lot of changes have taken place. Bloomberg and Reuters stopped offering their services in Russia. And now the market has to find alternative providers of information, systemic information. Of course, some people get data from VPN, through VPN, but we must find alternative sources to come to a consensus about foreign assets. Then transparency. Now we have a trend the other way around, and we understand why. The companies do not disclose data about themselves, or they disclose only a small part of that information. We have a story that foreign banks stopped covering Russian companies, and Russian analysts see that it's more difficult to work because they cannot make a call and get all the data they need. How to build the consensus? It's a big question. Next problem is that the trades in the Moscow stock market could look different if assets were sold in foreign stock exchanges. Then, of course, in the current uncertain situations, with greater discount, you could still sell. Russian internet was sold at the level of foreign analogs, and other companies sold at a discount, the Russian discount. How to define the Russian discount now? It's a very big question. The situation is developing, it's changing, the number of problems will be overcome, but how to evaluate? It's a non-trivial question. And as we started talking about IPO, classically, in IPO there is stage one after the announcement. There is a process of remarketing. And now the audience where we can talk about evaluation was reduced to about 6 Russian investors. The feedback sources are not available anymore. And statistically, you have a much limited data asset, data area. I believe that the market will find answers to all the questions. Yes, we'll touch upon that question a little later. Yes, I would like to add, I would like to divide the situation between short term and longer term. In the short term, we shall see who is going to survive and who is not, and then move the money from one pocket to another. If we look further on, the classical methods seem to go, but they didn't go. They stay with us because our DCFs and models and multipliers will still stay. But in the near future, I think we shall have two methods. The first one is the method of simple alternative. We have interest rate, deposits. It's DCF. It's the price of the money. We'll do it simpler. And second, it's a method of development. In this situation, who is going to develop, who is going to scale up, and who is going to die? That's all. And wherever we see the scalability opportunities getting more space because of the crisis, expansion, we're going to invest. And multipliers will be dealt with later. I made my first money in 1998. So it's the times of good opportunities. I wouldn't be too optimistic, because the people will say he is mad. I am not mad. We live in difficult times, but you realize that many companies see that the Western companies left an open niche here. It's a tragedy, yes, it is, but we can seize some of the niches because business needs expansion. If you don't seize, Kaspersky will. Yes, of course, we are positive will not lose the opportunities. Now, positive as an IT company sees a lot of support from government. The government supports IT companies. The tax maneuver is expanding, and we see unprecedented benefits, support by the government for IT companies. Accordingly, the question is, do you think IT companies do they need IPO at all? With all that kind of support, you can take money in the banks and develop without IPOs. So, Vladimir, can you say, what do you think? Well, stock markets are not only money. for the companies. Money can be obtained in different ways and sometimes cheaper than in the stock market. Stock market is transparency, stability, demonstration of the company that it works, that it's not about an owner, that it as such occupies a certain place in the market and it's evaluated. It's a classical example of business development. In Russia, many businesses are built by one person, one owner. We have a lot of companies who do not grow when the owner stops dealing with it. Sometimes the company is closed when the owner is no longer interested in it. But the task is to build a lot of independent businesses which will stay in the market and grow even if the founder goes away. The more companies of that kind we have, the more stable economy we are going to have. We are too young. We don't have many companies who are available for stock marketing because we need at least $1 billion of capital for the stock exchange to be interested and for the companies to be interested in stock exchange. When we have more such companies, we could say that IT market is stable, because now we say we have brains, we have IT companies, but the industry, the IT industries as an institution is too young. We have too few public companies. We must have dozens of them. And the support measures offered by the government are quite positive. Free money, sometimes interest-free, access to customers. We hope that as a result, large players will grow in the market.
It's important that companies should be able to survive, because quite often the government is kind of overfeeding them. But nevertheless, we already see examples such as the Ministry of Industry and Trade, the way it works. Just to finish up about today's situation and prospects for the IPO market for the next few years. I think Russia now has more chances to build a large IT company that can become a public company that could be valued at, let's say, $1 billion. In the past, a lot of IT sub-sectors were occupied by Western vendors, and it was very difficult to push them out, to compete with them. So everybody knows SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, and the only thing that was left for Russian startups was to develop some niche products and to do something better than SAP, let's say, but in a niche segment. But if you're going to make a vertically integrated solution, then you get the volume, the size, you can get the value of $1 billion. And now we see a lot of niches have become free because of foreign vendors went away. The cybersecurity sphere is quite interesting because through its specificity and the high level of regulations, this story happened a little bit earlier. I mean, the loss of trust to Western vendors, because the government was requiring import substitution. So I think positive happened a bit earlier than companies in other sectors. So we'll hope that in other IT subsectors, similar large vendors will emerge, not necessarily in cybersecurity, but in some other areas which can become public, based on what Evgeny said. It says the market economy is going to stay maybe within different boundaries, but it will be here, and investors will come moving here. Thank you. I would just like to add a couple of words to what my colleague said. Today, we need to look for any traditional and non-traditional ways to incentivize our employees, in addition to what we're saying about capitalization and attracting funding through IPO and other things. Look, today, what we have is our brains and our people, and we need to make it so that people should stay. So what can we do? Pay them 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, any normal professional operator can give them 500 and 600. But if you offer them options, some shares, and make them participants, co-creators, that would be much more interesting for them. So I think that today, the market mechanism that allows an employee to become part of the business is perhaps one of the most important tools that will make people think twice whether to leave or not to leave. If a person has an incentive, you can sit in Honduras but keep working on your Russian business. So look, you've added a subject that I would like to address, how to enter the stock market, stock exchange. Andrei mentioned the traditional approach, traditional IPOs, positive, went through direct placement, but we understand that direct placements worldwide is not an exclusive case. I think Spotify also went to the exchange through direct placement. How do you think, in the current Russian realities, the stock exchange, stock market, or considering all the limitations that you mentioned, is there one traditional way or direct placement? Do they make it more attractive? Or they pursue different goals, and it makes no sense to compare them. I'll ask Alina to comment, and maybe Dmitry and Anton. Yes, indeed, the subject is quite interesting. And in fact, the tech segment is a driver of all innovations that's happening in the CM market. The tech sector actually invented the direct placement that the American exchange approved. Then in the beginning of 2021, the direct placement was first used through primary investment. The tech sector was the one that invented hybrid auctions that we haven't yet seen in this country in terms of pricing. The Dutch auctions went to prices being fixed by underwriters rather than banks, investors defining that price. The tech sector also initiated the lock-up ban. So that's the. So therefore, there are a lot of options, and the options that unfortunately have not yet been used in this country. Before this meeting, I looked up the statistic for 2021. So in the US, last year, more than 1,000 IPO happens, and only 7 of them were in the direct listing format. So this tool, even if it is so attractive, is not used very broadly. Even today, it hasn't been proven that using the auction during the book building phase that gives you any advantages, because in one case it gave a positive result, in the other case it brought the price down. So there's no mathematical way to prove it. The elegance of my business and my area of expertise is that there's no standard solution. There's no one-size-fits-all. And based on your experience, you can always find something that fits your situation. And when Positive Technologies was going direct listing, we were watching it quite closely because you kind of created new precedent. So just like lawyers, we work on a precedent basis. So, in fact, there are a lot of opportunities, and I'm hoping that the conditions that we have now, coming back to the government support question, will push on a regulatory level the market, not only to create special conditions like cheap mortgages, high salaries, but maybe it'll become a leap that will help us develop further in terms of financial tools. Because Moscow Stock Exchange made a colossal jump in its development in terms of access infrastructure. It's second to none, taking the New York, Frankfurt, or London exchange. And Amsterdam exchange suddenly popped up last year. Well, there's a different story. It's a separate story. Why? Of all countries. So I think that in order to bring all this stock market up and come back to the market situation, we need to create new tools, or at least to use the tools that already exist worldwide, but within the limitations in the current regulations are not being used in this country so far. What do you think? SPO, IPO direct listing. You have to understand what an IPO is in general, because worldwide, an IPO is a huge event, is a lot of people involved, a lot of people are being hired, analysts going across all the different rich foundations and funds to PR the company. So it's a fully fledged PR event. This is the biggest difference between an IPO and a direct listing. Also, an important point is that IPO is about a certain set of rules that the company agrees to observe. So you can't go away from these rules. For instance, regarding the price that you're going to place. So this PR campaign is exactly to determine that price that would fit the range of interest to company management. It's a big event. The rest listing is a faster approach, is a cheaper approach, but is an approach that has less certainty. The company doesn't know whether the people will start buying the shares, or maybe will have to sell a ruble a share. It may become absolutely uninteresting to the management, and then they will have to do something to delist the shares. Actually, this is something really in contradiction of what you're saying about uncertainty. So what is the evaluation based usually? It's based on the analyst research, but it's not just research, it's called deal research. But if there's no deal in direct placement, and in direct placement there's no deal, then there's no research. And if there's no research, there's no valuation. So what kind of a price point a company should come to an exchange, stock exchange? So this is really our case. And we had to, based on the opinion of analysts that are not institutional, but based on a certain community of analysts, to draw up some initial price to start trading from that price. And I'm mentioning this to confirm your statement that direct placement has a lot of uncertainty about it. Let me just add a bit. It's exactly the debate that is going on in the United States in terms of using direct listing. This is basically what it's all about, because in direct listing, you don't have due diligence that is usually a run to define the valuation, and it's kind of broader than the valuation as such. But it's the fact that during the price setting in the IPO, there are banks that also carry responsibility for the disclosure of risks that apply to the company and the industry that investors need to pay attention to. In direct listing, this information is presented in a much sparser format. So therefore, indeed, it's not a simple question, what's better? Which of the two is better? It's clear that even in direct listing, if we take international practice, you still hire not an underwriter, but a financial consultant that helps you arrive at some pricing, even though it's based on a smaller selection in terms of deal research. But nevertheless, it is a justified valuation. It's not just like you come and say, I cost $100. Because then the trade starts happening, and then the security can go down. Yeah, we've seen examples of that. Well, frankly, happily, we were able to avoid this. Firstly, I'd like to say that it all was invented by Churchill in 1918. And secondly, if anyone remember the initial phase of creating the Russian stock market, when we were all running about regions and were paying cash for these shares and then brought them to the stock exchange, it was the direct listing in its exact shape. We brought a lot of companies to listing in the 90s, in the noughties, and this is the way the Russian stock market emerged. I remember I came to Boris Titov and said, Boris, you have a great company. Abroad, so yes, let's bring it to the stock market. Let's do direct listing. And we did it, and Abroad is now being listed. Why am I mentioning it? There is nothing new about this. And in reality, you understand that a colleague was very right in saying that an IPO is a very expensive activity. I would even say that it was Goldman Sachs who invited it to earn a lot of money. Well, I was just waiting for someone to mention this greedy banks who are to blame. Yes, it's lobby. What do you always say? I think that in the current conditions, I think the new version of an IPO with a narrow circle of institutional investors from whom you can get feedback on the valuation, it brings the IPO closer to direct listing. In fact, the difference is not that big. If you have 50 or 100 feedback lines, this is a source of more or less reliable information. If you only have 5 or so, then you're not getting a comparable advantage compared to direct listing. On the other one hand, it's always difficult to be the first. You, in the newest history that we have, were the ones to come first, to take up this challenge, and you succeeded. Yes, it's clear that for you, direct listing is not going to stay in parity with IPO as a tool. But it's quite possible that the specific weight of direct listings in Russia will be higher, at least for the next couple of stages of development. Because Alina is quite right, saying that indeed there are very few companies. In the US, direct listing is done by companies that you don't need to sell to banks. They sell themselves quite well. And there's another factor in the Russian market. Direct listing in Russia. I mean, it's good for you to speak about yourself because you have a growth of 30 to 50% and the margin quite good and you're paying out dividend. But there are not too many companies like that in the market. And it's clear that the success of direct listing directly depends on the history of the company as such. Because for a retail investor, it's quite possible they have an opportunity of going and buying shares of other companies at the Moscow Exchange. They can go and buy American shares in St. Petersburg Exchange. Hong Kong is going to join. So the competition has not gone away. It's there. And you need some luck to achieve success. But on the whole, I think that the two cases have come close. Okay, thank you. Our time is running up 6 or 7 minutes. By the way, I forgot to mention to those watching us online that you can ask a question. If you use the QR code here in the backdrop, you can ask a question in Telegram. But while we have some questions from the floor, there's a microphone or that you can use to ask the question. Hello, Sova Capital, Stanislav Yudin. Today, it has already been mentioned about the size of the Russian market, and the estimate that you mentioned will be based on the size and dynamic of the Russian market. The second foot of positive technologies, can it emerge? Is it possible to talk about expansion to other countries? What are they? Have you already made any steps to expand your sales force in these countries? And when can we expect the preliminary estimate, at least regarding the targeted market size in these countries? Yes, thank you. We had a broadcast on radio with Evgeny, and we touched upon this subject. Yes, of course, positive ambitions go beyond Russia and have never been confined in Russia. The current thing is that because of the explosive growth of the Russian cybersecurity market, and because the foreign vendors left the market, a huge market has come into the hands of the Russian companies. We are now getting 100 billion worth markets out of the 180 billion worth because the foreign vendors have left the market. So our biggest priority today is just to cope with this size. We are kind of harvesting now it's a big challenge for us how to cope with this volume. Talking about the international expansion, yes, of course. We see ourselves an international cyber security company. The markets that we see are, let's say, geopolitically loyal to Russia, not even CIS, but the countries of Asia, the Gulf, South America, strange as it may seem, we already have customers from these countries. We directly sell our products in all these countries. And I think that in the coming 2 or 3 years, these 2% that we have today, I mean, as a contribution of foreign sales to our revenue, will turn into double digits. And I think the next year, when we're going to, by the end of this year, when we're going to define the strategy for the next 3 years, we'll be able to share more details about this. Well, maybe you have some questions not regarding positive, but in general, regarding the stock market. Can you pass the microphone over, please? Thank you. Thank you. I have a question to Dmitry. Dmitry, you said that today in the Russian market, the whole valuation strategy for dividend in companies has broken down. But now, many companies in the sanction condition are hiding their reporting. How, in these conditions, when you don't really have any information, accurate information from the company as such, how can you evaluate the company in terms of prospects or future threats? Thank you. I think that professional analysts are now in the best position possible because these companies have taken away even historical reporting, and we have it all in our models. There are certain factors. Firstly, you have access to investor relations. They can contribute some information. Part of the information can be found in open sources. So most of the Russian market are exporters. So the dynamic of raw materials, the sizes, are the most important factors. Some analysts have a favorite method of looking how similar companies are reporting, let's say in the US, and thinking how does it work with Russian companies. It's not altogether accurate, but on the whole, you can arrive at some estimates. Of course, it's not going to be an accurate estimate with complete reporting, but the dynamic can always be derived, and you can always use it to evaluate the company correctly.
Вопрос, да?
Question? Yes. Vladimir Zharkovsky, Trade 123. I have both a comment and a question. What I heard is that is somewhat nervous statement that Reuters and Bloomberg are leaving Russia being a sign of a dire time for us, because now we don't have a capability to broadcast the opinions of the foreign participants in terms of evaluating Russian assets. Here, I would like to ask my colleagues a question. How do you believe this problem could be bypassed? Because it exists, and it looks likely that we'll have to deal with that for several years to come. Of course, they'll come back, as the song says, but it won't happen soon. And also, I remember the time in 1990 when Reuters and Bloomberg were fully absent from Russia, but nevertheless, major investment banks like Fleming at that time, they merged after that, and they were not using these aggregators. They did their own homework to evaluate the companies, and it was this that was shaping the market. So then a question: how do you assess our own capabilities, their potential, so that in the time when the famous monsters of rock, as I would call them, have gone away, how well will we be able to do the evaluation? Maybe we could go away from the traditional Russian discounts that I don't know how it has arrived, in addition to the emerging markets discount, because political risks have always been taken into account. We, for instance, can offer discounts for our companies having a positive cash flow and assign like a positive factor to it, as opposed to the tech companies in the US, where not everybody, the cash flow is positive. I think some new, to become a lawmaker in this haute couture market, now that we don't have any foreign players.
Let me try to start answering. I mentioned Reuters and Bloomberg. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. You work with the provider. He sends you a letter that he is disconnecting. It's not pleasant. It corrects your activities for several weeks, for a month, sometimes more, but you will find, we already found the providers who provide the same information. They are not Western, they are Eastern. It's not a problem. It's a technical problem. But we have more difficult problems that companies tend to disclose less information than how to form a consensus. It's not well known, but such factors will become weaker. We are at the peak of information distortion. So let us come to the end, bring to the end our session. So in your question, you had an answer, a traditional answer. People say they need several months. I know people who solved the problem in 3 days. Modern technologies, social media, 3 days, more. We have a lot of Telegram channels which can provide any kind of information. And finally, I agree with the colleagues. It's a great niche that is going to be filled very quickly. Lack of information. Well, it's like lack of food. And we worked in the 90s. What is lack of information? It's money. Well, at this positive point, I would like to conclude our section. The fact that we are here discussing the future of the Russian stock market and the companies that may work there, it means that the market existed, it does exist, and it will exist. Positive is one of the examples that where everything is going to be all right. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to us online. See you again.